Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'd like to welcome you back if you've been following us. This is Demos Intuitive Arts Reflections for Real Life. And I'm very grateful you're here. As you can see, this is a very unique opportunity since we are such a new channel. We have a few things that we have up our sleeves, and one of them is to invite people back who are so important in our lives. And so tonight we have a guest, Kyle Supley, who I'll let you know a little bit more about as we move forward. So I'm super glad you're here and grateful. Um, just as a reminder, our channel was created with just a really simple idea and a belief that great works of art, even if they're not very well known, have something to teach us. And it's not always just about the actual art product, but it's really the things we learn about ourselves. So together, when we meet here, typically once a week, we slow down, we spend some time with just a single artwork, and we allow it to almost become this beautiful doorway that introduces us into a conversation about our life and creativity and our relationships and what it means to really just be human. My hope is that each of these episodes leaves you seeing not just only the artwork a little bit differently, but perhaps seeing yourself a little bit differently too. So, as I mentioned tonight, it's especially meaningful because I'm joined by someone who has been in my life, and he's going to make a face when I say it, for just about 35 years.
Oh my God, that's so great.
So
Uh,
this is Kyle Supley, and just a little background story of who he is. This gentleman actually entered my life as one of my students, and over the years, our relationship has grown into just a beautiful and treasured friendship. And we've also now moved into being creative collaborators. Kyle's done a few workshops with us in collaboration with Dimos, and it's just been a wonderful opportunity to share his knowledge and spend some time with him, which is one of my favorite things to do. Kyle is an accomplished photographer. He's an extraordinary entrepreneur and someone that has an incredible eye for beauty and design. He's also an avid collector of clocks and lighting, and he uh, a consumer. This is where I
oh,
got.
I would say mid-century consumer goods. You can fall it under there. It's basically anything somebody would have bought for their home can kind of, if it's awesome, I'm into it.
Yeah, and I'm glad I stumbled on that because it was an opportunity for Kyle to further explain it because we never know who shows up on our channel. I just know that Kyle has always created some really extraordinarily beautiful and unique things. And so we're going to be very fortunate tonight because he'll also give us a little insight to some of his collection. Tonight, our conversation is going to center around, again, one specific artwork. And when I proposed this to Kyle, I asked him quite simply, what's your favorite artwork? Don't think about it too much. What is one standout piece that you go back to if someone said, what's your favorite artwork? And so Kyle shared, and this actually was not a surprise to me based on the way I know him to be, and it's Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory. And I'm sure that this is a piece that many of you have seen before. It's not very big. In fact, what you see on this surface, this blue surface, is just about the size the actual painting is. It was painted in 1931, and it was actually acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1934. Um, this particular painting changed the way people were thinking about art at that time. And it really became one of the most defining works of the Surrealist movement. And that was a movement that explored dreams, imagination, memory, and the mysterious landscape of the unconscious mind, very strongly steeped into the work of Sigmund Freud. So Salvador Dali said that he was inspired by watching a piece of Camembert cheese melting in the burning heat. Now, that's something that most people never heard before. But once you hear it, you're never going to unknow it. Uh, from that simple moment came out one of the most unforgettable images in Western art. It's a soft, melting clock draped over a quiet, dreamlike landscape. The landscape you see here is actually from Salvador Dali's memory of his youth. He spent a lot of time in Catalonia. And so that beautifully rendered realistic landscape is something he spent a lot of time looking at. Oftentimes, we find ourselves asking questions rather than searching for answers. And perhaps that's why this painting continues to fascinate not just Kyle and me, but so many more people for over a century or just about a century later. I mean, keep in mind, this was done in 1931, and here we are in 2026. So it's almost 100 years old. And it's an amazingly modern piece that pushes the boundaries of what we typically gravitate toward. Is time measuring something, or is time measuring our experience? And that's a question I think that Salvador Dali oftentimes reflected on. Do our memories preserve the past, or are they quietly being reshapen by the way we remember things? And can a single image, such as this one, invite us to see our own lives very differently? I'm so blessed to have this opportunity to have asked Kyle what his favorite painting was, because I'm going to open up a discussion with him. I'd love to know so much more about how he views and why he gravitated toward this. So, Kyle, I want to welcome you back. It's a true joy to see you in person. We talk a lot, we text a lot, but very rarely now these days do we have a chance to see each other. And it's a delight to have this conversation with you. So, of all the extraordinary works in art history, and Kyle does, and I can vouch for this, he has an extensive background in his education of art history. But out of all of the pieces that you have learned about in a formal setting, and also in all the really thousands of hours you've spent looking at different kinds of art and artifacts, why was this painting, The Persistence of Memory, the one that stood out to you as your favorite?
Well, first off, it's so great to see you and such an honor to be here. Hi, everybody. Glad to be back. Yeah, I mean, it's you told me not to overthink it, and it was, easily my favorite. Even when I was a child when I first saw it, I was shocked when I saw it a few years ago in person how small it really was because I knew it was so intricate and had such beautiful detail. I mean, the fact I think he painted it with was it one little piece of eyelash hair or something I heard like really tiny and incredible. So you know, but anyway, I've always loved the piece, and even as a kid, it was so interesting, and it did something to me. Of course, art does that, but to see clocks, which I was already interested in already collecting, but something that was supposed to be so solid and sturdy, be so not itself and be melting and soft and be in a way you never would see a clock at that time unless it was really melting in the sun. That's a lot of heat. But it was very surrealist, right? And so it was a lot like a dream. It was kind of creepy, but I loved the quietness of it. I liked there weren't a lot of people because people bring such a different layer of information to a painting, and then you apply yourself or you think about who they are and all that. I like that it was just a few ants on the back of a pocket watch, and some strange creatures, and that little bit of a face because that image would come up in his other paintings. But it looked a little bit like a kind of a slug to me as a kid. Yeah, right there. So that was intriguing. I love the simplicity of it. The colors were very simple. It looked like a real photograph, but of course it's not real. And I was always interested since I first saw Back to the Future as a kid, my favorite movie, about jumping through time and the idea of time and what is it and how we remember it. And we go literally one way through it. We can think about the future, but the past is what's actually happened generally. And our remembrance of it, I think, is so intriguing and important. And especially how dreams each night, well, not each night, but when you get to have a dream, hopefully it's nightly, but that your body and brain are processing what you thought of, know of, see, and try to bring it back up again in alternate, weird, strange ways. And I think there was always an interest for me in just things that weren't the norm in a way. Not too far out, like you can take anything and just blast it completely out of a canon, but I liked things that were sort of close to what they had been, but we were seeing it in a slightly different, altered way. Um, I think as an adult looking back, I think it was my own way of being like, I'm a little bit different. I think about things, I feel like an old soul. I think about things deeper than some others I noticed did. And so I was always drawn to history, the past, and people cared about it. And I thought that clocks, since seeing, I mean, I already liked them from seeing my great grandmother. She had a collection of really interesting different clocks from the past, from the Kit Kat clock with the eyes that go back and forth, a cuckoo clock where the bird comes out, that I thought that was just a cartoon joke. I didn't realize it was a real clock. Oh, Westminster clock going off right now on the half hour. Um, but I love the idea of marking time also through some things that were fun, where a chime goes off, a bird cuckoos. Like I always loved humans' way of not through design and art, but trying to entertain ourselves in a way, especially before the computer when you only kind of had what was in front of you and craft and things you built and music boxes. I always thought that was really beautiful because it represented the human spirit to me. And so seeing that in an object was really kind of awesome.
Do you have any memory of like, and this might be hard because knowing Kyle all those years, I know him, full disclosure, he was very young. He was not an adult when we first met. And do you have any memory of the first time you saw that painting?
I think
And
it
that's
was probably in a book in the school library of like famous artworks because I probably should have been an art historian or something working in that world. I didn't foresee how I could make enough money that I wanted to be able to buy those paintings one day if I was only selling them. It's a whole thing, or just doing history. I probably should have done it, but it is still all in my brain. So many art pieces, as you mentioned, through time. But I think the first time I saw it, I probably was probably 7 or 8 years old. And that was around the time I saw Back to the Future for the first time as well. And they zoomed through Doc's. Doc is if you don't know the film, but you should watch it if you haven't seen it. But he's an inventor and an Einstein sort of type, also a little bit like Edison. I was really into Thomas Edison and inventors as a kid. Being from Schenectady, New York, my parents all worked at, well, my not my parents, my dad, his whole side worked at General Electric. I volunteered at the GE Museum as a kid, so I was already surrounded by electronics and lamps and lighting and things that kind of were otherworldly and came alive. And that I also spent a lot of time with my parents as a kid in the woods and Adirondacks and peaceful, quiet places, sort of like that painting. But so to me, I really liked that quietness, but I also love the idea of these huge, outrageous, the General Electric sign that had these big incandescent bulbs that glowed and changed and moved and was so not being alone in the woods. It was this whole other magic that we kind of had captured almost from another world and brought to life. And I thought it was kind of like it was magical thing that we had created. And the first time we had in millennia that now we've harnessed electricity and created it and used ingenuity and science. Like, what?
so what Kyle's talking about really is not that far off in terms of time either when Dali painted this painting. And so, this connection that if I hear you correctly, it was this sort of like balancing act of this tension almost, which is this beautiful, beautiful tension of something as beautifully sublime and quiet as the Catalonian landscape or like the landscape of the Adirondacks or upstate New York, especially when you were
Sure.
growing up. And then these sort of surprises that had a little bit of um, a little bit of even more tension because, and I don't want to put words or thoughts into anybody's head, but the ants on the clock and the way the clocks are melting, even though someone might think of it as like, yes, it was melting camembert cheese, I still feel quite uncomfortable by it. And so whenever we have something which is where we are very comfortable and then we juxtapose it with something that's very uncomfortable, that tension actually has us as human beings make a decision which way to lean. And so there's this tension of like, I really want to be comfortable. Like, who doesn't want to be comfortable? I just want to be left alone. I don't want to have any difficulties, right? And using this artwork to maybe reflect a little deeper, the tension that that painting brings up is that it's so amazing and it's so beautiful, but it really makes me very uncomfortable. If you've ever had an ant crawl on you, you know it's like and you want to just scoot it off, right? And as human beings, we have to find that balance because without the tension, we're going to become very, very passive. And although that may feel really good in the moment, we don't really grow. And I think that in some ways, Dali was always trying, well, any artist really, any creative person, you don't have to be a visual artist, but anybody who follows a creative path, a chosen creative path with intentionality, is always on the cusp of I feel like I'm going off a cliff, but oh wow, I'm really not. And now I feel really good. Oh no, but I'm being dragged down the cliff again,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Oh,
yeah.
what do I have to do to get back to center? So it's really interesting that you were drawn to this as a young child because of your natural character. And certainly I want to hear so much more, but I just want to throw out some questions too, because and this is hard. You saw this piece when you were so young and you have a memory of it, right? Have you found that your relationship with this painting has changed as you yourself have changed and evolved?
Well, it's a persistent memory. Huh. Um, of the piece. Well, but I'll answer the question in a second. But before I forget it, you brought up something really interesting though about that tension piece. And to me, I think the beauty of being human and alive is that tension of fear, comfort, but also lamps, clocks, and these things that I do collect in a way represent to me, even though they're inanimate objects, but kind of what life is and what living is. When I was a kid, I was actually a little scared of clocks, really young, because the faces were kind of odd because they talked to me in a way like a face in a weird way, like an empty-ish room. You have this big circle. It's kind of representative of what a parent would be if you were like in a crib and you saw this kind of circular face there. I mean, that's a little wild, but it is interesting. We say there's hands of a clock and the face of a clock, and that they are kind of these living things that mark time and help us get through this life and know what time to meet for a call like we're doing now, or just all of it. So I think there is something really magical and otherworldly to timekeeping and also electricity and lighting and the rest. And then as far as the painting changing, I mean, it creeped me out, but intrigued me. I think it still does. I think knowing more about Dali and his interest in dreams and that life tension helps explain it a bit further. But as you ask that question, it's interesting in some ways, in a weird way, don't feel like it's changed that much for me, which is kind of comforting in a way. Knowing it's so
Yeah.
small was a big change, but the content of it is interesting. And then seeing some of the elements of those that painting, because it was really the first Dali that I looked at, represent and appear in many other of his pieces is also interesting and comforting and kind of that life thread through his works. A woman I used to know had a piece by Dali. I think it was made in the 40s or 50s, but it was a beautiful like teardrop eye with a clock in the middle of it as well. And it's, his whole play with eyes, tears, life, tension, dreams. It's just something so kind of really cool, I guess. And
Well,
then
you're
old,
hitting on all of these elements that when we humans are drawn to a piece of artwork, we're drawn to it because there are elements in it that are speaking to us very much like, and I love that you kind of reminded me, not that I've forgotten, but it's nice to hear it out loud, that a clock does have a face and arms and the body of a clock. I've heard that too, the body of the clock, right? So the personification of something that is seemingly an inanimate object is also what a painting is. A painting is nothing more than just a flat surface. And you brought up this idea of light. And surrounded because you are such an amazing collector of beautiful, beautiful, very, very oftentimes unique lamps and lighting fixtures. Each one of them offers an opportunity to enhance the human experience. We forget that. You can change the lighting certainly with a different voltage of a bulb, but the lampshade on a lamp will diffuse the light in different ways. And that also can enhance the human experience. Before we actually hit record, both of us were playing with our technology to just get things set up right. And one of the things Kyle did was he turned a light on and he turned it off. And as soon as he turned the light on, having grown up in New York City myself, and that's where Kyle resides, primarily he's in New York City, I said, "Ooh," I said, "I almost prefer it off because it hit a memory with me of being in a big 1930s apartment, interestingly enough, around the same time of that painting and the very tall ceilings and how the ceiling lights would make it feel sort of very dramatic. Um, and also this idea of time, which is like, yes, we keep track. This keeps us in line with our life. It propels us forward. We get lost in time. And this idea of memory, which I just love that you chose this piece, and the idea of persistence of memory. And how do we allow certain memories to persist past the point that might be healthy or unhealthy? Um, and how often we sometimes, out of the clear blue sky, we are dragged into a memory by noticing somebody that might remind us of someone that is no longer here in their physical body that we were fond of, or maybe a fragrance too will draw us back into a memory. So this is such a magnificent piece, and the title is so well suited. And I mean, Kyle and I, we've said this before, we can just talk and talk and talk forever. We so enjoy each other's company. And so, those of you who are watching this, unfortunately, we are going to start to move to the next part of this very, very special YouTube, which is Kyle has graciously consented, offered to let us come into his personal space so he can share some of his most favorite clocks. And so I thank Dalí for introducing this topic for us and also initiating the conversation. Hopefully, some of this has struck some thought for everybody here as well watching. Just some things to reflect on. Maybe you'll look at your clocks or your devices that track time maybe a little bit differently. And think about this idea of how tracking time is also tracking our memories. So thank you so much for choosing this piece, Kyle. And I would just absolutely love if you could share your passion, which you are just so gracious to let us come into your space.
Absolutely. No, it's very exciting. This is such a great topic. And you're right. I'm realizing I could talk for hours with you about this, but we'll be brief. But yeah, it's funny as you mentioned that though about memory too, that the word nostalgia, which I always loved. I have a magazine somewhere here. Actually, I should have brought it up, but it's called "I'm Everyone's Wild About Nostalgia," and it came out like it was, I think, Life magazine for people. Not it was Life, but it came out in like 1967 or 68, and it was looking back at the 1930s and all that. So there was, it didn't really start, I would say, in full until like the 1950s, where people started looking back at previous eras and design. And in the 50s, some people were looking, if you think of I Love Lucy's house, or the later I Love Lucy house, but the country look, looking back to the 20s and 30s and remembering their childhoods for people that had maybe made it in New York City, but they had come from a farm. They were now at an age where they wanted to remember the good times and surround themselves with that style. That would continue on and become much more so in the late 60s and 70s, especially with Hollywood films, like The Boyfriend and oh my God, what's the one? Bonnie and Clyde. But all these looking back at the 30s and 40s, and that was a big trend. And it's funny they bring it up about style and art, but a lot of my favorite art and film would resonate with me. And then I would remember that. And when I was antiquing or at a shop, I would be triggered in a good way of being like, oh, that reminds me of Salvador Dali's painting, this lamp. This reminds me of Busby Berkeley films, or even Metropolis, the movie, kind of like this lamp here, which I'll show in a minute. But I love the idea of taking elements and surrounding yourself with it. And an important piece to me for all of this is, when is a clock or a lamp, using those examples, more than just something that lights up a room or tells you the time? Because that's easy. I also feel like with people, you can just be a person that gets through life, eats food, goes to bed, works. You could do that, but why not be more? Why not be a gymnast? Why don't you design or invent something? Why don't you be a fashion designer? Go push the boundaries and be as eccentric, fun, and creative as we can, because if we can, why not? So I will show you a little bit of the pieces. I wish I had a bigger place to show the items in less of a congested way, but I'm in a one-bedroom apartment in New York, so I'm doing my best. So it's a little more packed than I would prefer it to be, but you'll still get the
We
idea of
call
it.
that we call that in visual art world salon style.
There you go. Yes, true. I thought you were going to say maximalism. Or is that what they call it right today? What's the other word for decor? The people that are into tons of items. Anyway, that could be me. I don't know. But yeah, so the collection started when I was a little kid, and I was really into Art Deco when I was younger because I really loved New York City and the Empire State Building, and it was very different from when I grew up in the 1980s with like the country living look of my parents. So the hard edged and the chrome and the speed of these vintage looking cars, and also from the movies, was really inspiring to me. So I started really collecting Art Deco initially. We would go antiquing a lot in upstate. It's kind of a side hobby for my parents. Are now like, what have we done? But we would do it all the time. And I got to experience everything from 1800s objects, 1700s industrial farm equipment. I mean, all the eras. And I just love them all. And I'm pretty good at this point. I can pretty much date almost anything within 3 to 5 years of when it really was manufactured, because I'm crazy. No, but all that knowledge lives in here rent free. Most of the stuff I've landed now, aging up a little bit and collecting 50s stuff and 60s, a little bit of 70s. I've been hovering in the 1960s though, because to me it was really the wildest, most expressive, and the most fun use of technology, because we had done so much at that point with plastics and metals and chromes and expanded metals and just every printing, color printing, mechanisms, everything was really at its peak. I'd say after that, in the 60s and 70s, things started getting a little bit cheaper as far as like how they were made, how well made they were. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier, I want to say, and it's funny, this lava lamp is doing this right now, but you mentioned the idea of tension, and I didn't really think about it, but I mean, I guess in the back of my mind, I know this, but there is something I love so much about a pendulum clock, really any clock that isn't necessarily electronic, that has it too. But there's a tension to the gravity that makes them run. And there's something cool, I don't know, about it's continuing to run or continuing to flow like a lava lamp. It's something about that tension. I don't know if it reminds me that we're alive or what it really does, but I'm drawn so much to it. And it also is nice because it reminds you that there's energy that's been put into it from some way. Clocks that aren't electric or battery operated in the past, humans had to put their power into them, either by winding a spring or pulling up a weight and then letting gravity do the rest. But there was something, again, human to it, because some human had to interact with it to get it to run and do its thing that we had designed and invented anyway. So it's kind of this, it's like the harnessing of all the science is that fun tension. So without any further ado, might get
And what
shaky.
I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make you much larger so we can see your stuff better. Okay.
Oh, there's the lava lamp over here. I've been pointing to things throughout. Maybe you didn't get to see, but there's the tension of the heated wax in this early lava lamp, pulling and stretching apart. Here, we'll get a closer
Very
look.
Dalí, I will say, very
Right?
Salvador
Okay.
Dalí.
So this is outrageous lamp from probably around 1958, 59. Not necessarily mid-century modern, but definitely mid-century. There's the lava lamp there. Sorry, I'm going to switch sides here so we can direct this camera better. So it's supposed to look like um, a little UFO, right? And then a little alien potentially inside of it. My grandmother had the floral ring lava lamp, which you'll see in the kitchen in a moment, when I was a kid. And I thought it was real lava they had harnessed and put inside the globe. And it was just continuing to still work because it was red. I prefer them to be red because to me, if it's a lava lamp, shouldn't it look like lava? Here's another one here. This is the Aladdin lamp model, very rare. We have a Master Crafter's glowing clock that the light glows up through the etched glass. It's against the light wall, so it's hard to see. Here's a Luxcraft lamp that looks like it's taking off for the skies. I mean, talk about a lamp being more than the lamp. In the 50s and 60s, they just went outrageous with the different designs. Speaking of tension, here's
And
a lamp.
what a testimony to the human spirit. You
Really,
know,
right?
that's what it is. It's like onward and upward and let's just go
Exactly.
for it.
Like there's the outer space pink clock up there that looks like the cosmos. One of the first clocks I got there, the Starburst. This one from my church flicker room on Route 50 in Glenville. But yeah, you can see some of the other Starburst clocks. I just love the expressiveness of them. Let's see, what else do we have? We have another wild lamp here. Speaking of tension, it's a tension pole lamp. So it actually it's spring loaded and it holds itself between the ceiling and floor by the tension spring. And then it hovers. You pull the tassel to turn the light on and off. Made of plexiglass. Talk about science. Fiberglass lampshade. Way ahead of its time. Of course, we got this clock here. The atomic look. We have everybody put lights in everything. They have mood lighting. That one there. What a nice piece there. A Welby. This one, they wind themselves every 8 minutes with a battery. So it's really a mechanical clock with a battery that's doing the physical winding. So there's human ingenuity created the battery, harnessed the power, which runs a motor, which winds the spring that then runs the clock. Hello. It's a little dark in this section. We have a few others over here.
You know what's
There's,
so interesting? The TV looks so out of place.
I know. That's so
I mean,
mom
and being because it's just so it doesn't have any of the real
boring.
joie de vivre of all of these pieces
Exactly.
that were
I
so
need to get one
stunning.
of those. They make those ones that look like an art. They can actually show art on, and I need to show persistence of memory. I also love advertising art. Like it's just we have some reflection, but look how beautiful the artwork is of the hand done illustrations of these Honeywell clock systems that you could get for your home. But they're also famous George Nelson designs for Howard Miller, which is kind of fun. What else? Here's another clock that is a pendulum clock, but running on a battery that runs itself. That's probably from like 67. Here we have a rain lamp. We have more ingenuity of let's make a lamp that looks like a woman in the rain. Why? I don't know, but it's kind of great. But I also love there's a fluorescent tube at the bottom. Nothing is less nature and rain than fluorescent cold lighting, but sure. One of my favorite first clocks I ever got here, the out of Brooklyn, the United Clock Company, and that's the Statue of Liberty with the little boats going around the harbor, where I would end up living, where I am today. A tabletop cuckoo clock. Speaking of tension, all these, the anniversary clocks, that you usually wind them once a year on your anniversary. And the balls spin around on a very tiny, tiny, thin wire that almost always breaks if you're not careful. And then they spin slowly using centrifugal force science to make the time go. There's another one.
Amazing.
Two more there. And then that one is actually electromagnetic. Barrel in the center is run by a battery that's pushing that magnet rod back and forth. So each time it comes the other way, it gets pushed by the magnet to go the other direction. Here we have a really cool piece. This is from Bleecker Bob's Records. Did you ever go there, Stephanie?
Yes, I did.
He he was a
Historic
neon
and epic.
he was a neon collector, and this was in his collection. And when he was closing his shop, I was able to buy it. And the apartment that I was at in Queens, that you know well, this was there as well. You probably remember it. And one time I went to set the clock while it was on, and I forgot that the power is sent right through the hands of the clock. And you weren't home, you weren't there at the time, but it threw me back onto the floor, and my heart was beating in ways I didn't know it could. And I looked it up afterwards and it says most people don't survive a neon electrocution. So if I'm talking a little quickly, I apologize. It's from that. I'm kidding. I always do that. But okay, so there's that. What else do we have? Oh, this is a cool one. So this one is actually battery operated, but not in a quartz battery way. On the back side of it, can't take it off now, but it's a tiny little pendulum on the back side of it that is being pushed by a mechanical clock. So it's actually a little pendulum that you can't see is then making the entire clock, which is balanced, speaking of tension, right there on these two little needle cups. And the whole thing then goes back and forth. And you actually adjust the timekeeping with that little bob there at the bottom. So much science. It's so cool.
I
Um,
mean, it really, as it's so fascinating, and what amazing, it's fascinating because you're taking us on a tour, and as you're doing that, there are a couple of things that are occurring to me. I'm going to put the painting back up too because it's first I'm thinking like, wow, if Dali was watching this, what would he think? And but it's also initially when you said you kind of apologetically said, oh, it's in a small apartment, but the salon style of living with these things, they become very much alive, very much like the clocks that are melting, and there is that constant tension with the shapes and the direction of the clocks themselves. And each one is moving, maybe like even the tail on the kitty cat right now.
right.
There are some that are very, very stagnant, and then there are some that are clearly moving. Um, it's just a truly amazing collection, as I hope all the people who are watching this would just be so honored because it's a gift and yes, it is unusual. But what a gift to have someone of Kyle's caliber join us and give us their insight and their thoughts about, a piece of visual art and how it might have inspired them, or maybe their inspiration was always there and it was propelled forward through that piece of artwork that Kyle saw when he was just a child. So we could go on and on and on. And
You get the gist. Let me just show you the bedroom real quick and then we can call it because I think people are screaming out there for more. I can hear them through the internet. Um,
I don't doubt it. I'm just gonna make you bigger.
I love these painted tile clown, dog, and monkey art pieces from the 50s when they were changing the idea. A bit surrealism, really, of
Yes,
stretching
it
a
is. It's a
painting
lot of
for the long,
surrealism, actually.
you know? And there's another starlight clock, like just the shape of that lamp over there, also by the Lux Craft. Or actually, that one might be a Majestic. And then the dancers, I mean, all of it kind of really came together all in the mid-century. There's another piece there that was actually from Jacques. And then here's a really cool one with the glass. The light is shining up through the etched glass, and then you have the clouds above.
Ah, incredible. And it just really makes you be reminded that everything starts with a thought. And, my hope has always been as a teacher and all the different crazy things that I've done outside of the classroom has always been to uh, bring people together so that they can share their passions and feel comfortable enough that they let us in a little bit to know who they are. And everything starts with a thought. Everything starts with a human thought. And that's what sets us apart from inanimate objects. We can make inanimate objects and personify them, but the objects themselves can never be made without a human thought. And it's the creative process that I just feel we're so honored to have. Um, and very honored to have spent this time with Kyle. Um, you know, it brings to mind that we probably should revisit each other and maybe continue our conversation, maybe use other pieces of artwork, or maybe just use one of the collections, one of your favorite in your collection. Um, but before we finish, I just really I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are our first Demos Intuitive Arts Reflections for Real Life guest. I also want to thank you for the years and years and years of amazing friendship that you have gifted me with. Um, and, your
Gotcha.
insight and your generosity of spirit has never been lost on me. And what an opportunity you have given me to share you with other people outside of our little orbit. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. It's always a pleasure to get a cup of coffee and see you in real time up. And as the time is ticking away, I just want to mention that please know that if you'd like to connect with Kyle, as you know, just this little bit you got to meet him, he's an extraordinary human, worthwhile reaching out to. We're going to have his information in the description, his contact, his Instagram. So please look for that and know from the bottom of my heart, if you stumbled upon us for the first time or you've been following us, um, that we are so honored and humbled to have you. Please continue, reach out to others who might enjoy it. And I will just like to close by turning it over to Kyle. Is there anything else you would like to offer out to our lovely audience?
Well, the clock is going off on the hour. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but the Westminster's going off, which is so perfect. No, thank you so much for letting me share my little bit of a world. And I think the whole thing, that reason I was drawn to you and love you and educators so much, is I think it's all about sharing what, because we can only reach and gather so much as individual people, but if we can share something cool and bounce it up to others or out to others, I think that's one of the most important things. So we can try to preserve and care for these items, these beautiful pieces that were created, because they aren't forever. They might last longer than humans do in some ways, but we do have to kind of remember that and think about that, so that they have their own persistence of memory well into the future to also continue to educate and entertain future generations. And so there's, people always put a lot of importance on art, as they should, but I hope more people can look at material objects and items as art in a way, because they really have a similar, I mean, the intent might not be as deep as a fine art piece, but there's still a lot of craft and a lot of human ingenuity to them. And I think they're, hopefully we can elevate their importance before it's too late, because these things get lost every day, either they break or disappear, get thrown into the garbage. And so it's important to care for them.
Absolutely. And to combine that with, the reason we're here together, that these are the relationships to objects, preservation of objects, and relationships to each other, and preservation of our relationships. So I send so much love out to Kyle in the techno,
Love, Dove.
and I send so much love out to everybody here. Thank you for joining us, and we shall see you soon. Hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for being here. Have a
Thanks,
wonderful,
everybody.
wonderful night.
Thanks, Steph. Bye.